The station hadn't broadcast for 72 years, until it did, without source. Inside, systems booted in silence. Nothing was active, yet everything had already been recording.
Narrator. The voice didn't match records. It spoke names no one aboard had ever carried.
This isn't a warning. This is what you forgot to remember.
The crew list had no living entries, but the system showed someone had just checked in. No one opened the door. It had already been waiting, unsealed long before arrival.
The pods were empty, but something inside remembered how to breathe.
No name, no records, just a pulse labeled undefined and a timestamp from 20 years ahead. Narrator. Security logs weren't corrupted. They were edited. It wasn't a signal calling for help. It was an instruction. And we'd already obeyed. There was no signal path left. But the frequency still flowed, through something unseen. The frequency carried more than sound. It imprinted memory where cameras couldn't. The box wasn't locked. It simply hadn't existed until we listened close enough. The log was ours, but we hadn't written it yet. Something wanted to wake. Not a person, a version of one.
They weren't ghosts. They were placeholders, waiting for context to catch up.
These weren't cries for help. They were reminders that someone once forgot to leave.
Who are you if no one recorded you?
The question wasn't directed at us. It was waiting for us to ask it.
This wasn't an echo. It was a boundary, closing in from the outside. It didn't end. It reset, like we'd just received a message we were about to send. Narrator. The station didn't loop. Time stuttered, like it was checking whether we were paying attention. The pod hadn't opened. It had simply resumed an earlier state, before occupancy. The environment mimicked memory, less a place, more a decision trying to recall itself. We weren't inside the station anymore. The station was inside its own confusion. The boundary didn't protect. It recorded collapse in slow rewind. The log wasn't a warning. It was an instruction we already hadn't followed. We began seeing versions of ourselves we hadn't yet become, and already left behind. Architecture rewrote itself, as if the station couldn't agree what year it was. The signal wasn't asking questions. It was answering things we hadn't dared ask yet.
Every pause was rehearsed. The forgotten frequency was never accidental. It waited for audience.
The station had begun to echo itself, like memory trying to rewatch its own creation. These weren't malfunctions. They were bleed-throughs of places the signal had passed through.
We hadn't entered the station. We'd entered what it remembered sending out.
Physics hadn't failed. It had accepted revision.
Space didn't collapse. It curled inward, unsure which version of itself to settle on.
Reflections told one story. Recordings told another. Neither agreed on who was present.
We weren't decoding anything. We were what the signal had been trying to pronounce.
There was no destination, only passage. as if movement itself had replaced intention. Return was always part of the cycle. Identity wasn't. The station wasn't asking us to recall. It needed us to remember harder than before. The signal wasn't entering the station. It was rehearsing how the station once existed.
No one slept here. But the memory of sleeping had arranged itself anyway.
Another narrator had joined. Not replacing me, just reading the same memory from a different edit. Light didn't escape. It was returning from somewhere it had hidden too long. The station wasn't tracking life signs. It was indexing identity fragments.
Space had tired of being linear. Memory preferred curvature. It always ends where it started.
We hadn't looped. We'd just stopped resisting playback. It wasn't mocking me. It was sinking. My voice had become part of its structure.
Orientation didn't matter. The signal played in all directions, just not all at once. Broadcast had resumed. I hadn't started it, but I was the one continuing it.
Something was pacing with me. Not beside, not behind, just remembered differently.
History didn't lie. It filled empty time with entries no one would question.
This wasn't sabotage. The signal was learning how to sculpt memory into physical form.
It didn't record me. It absorbed me and continued telling the story from inside my syntax. No one removed the pods. The story just no longer required that part of itself.
The signal wasn't seeking contact. It was asking if it had become complete.
Distance had no scale. We measured space in doubt, not meters. Perspective reversed. The voice became the window. We just lived on the other side.
Multiple realities weren't competing. They were rehearsing which one would be kept.
No axis. No orbit. Just a system realigning to where it had always been pointed. Back inward.
This story is now self-governed.
The same corridor repeated, but not because we turned. Because the story looped its spine. The signal had a pulse. But it wasn't biological. It was structural memory.
Recognition didn't belong to the living anymore. The signal had remembered me too clearly.
It wasn't rewinding. It was re-choosing which version of events deserved permanence.
That wasn't the way out. That was the edge of where narrative had been rendered.
It invited no response. It simply needed silence long enough to overwrite the question. Even the metal remembered. It had absorbed too many retellings to stay inert.
Architecture was no longer stable. It flexed in sync with belief.
I had not been transmitting. I had been translated.
I wasn't placed here. I was remembered into this hallway.
It wasn't a log. It was a confirmation. This version of events had stabilized.
Not illusions. Not simulations. Just all the ways the story might have been received. We never left. We never arrived. We were always in between broadcasts. The transmission didn't need origin. It needed completion. Without light, the signal still carried meaning. Without voice, it still chose to be heard. 0 wasn't the beginning. It was the moment just before remembering began again. Stillness isn't silence. It's just the part of the signal waiting to be filled.
If someone watches this, the story resets. That's what the frequency is for.
You didn't hear a story. You heard its memory. And now, so will someone else.